Under South African law, all white men and only white men are expected to serve a total of 4 years in the army. And while the majority of white men are prepared to go into the army, which they see as their patriotic duty, there 5 years ago were hundreds. Today there are now thousands of white men that are saying, we are not prepared to go into that army. We are being called on not to defend the country as a whole. We are being called on to defend apartheid. And we are being called on to take up arms not against communists or agitators or terrorists, as the government claims, but against ordinary South African people who are struggling for their freedom. At the time of our formation, there were 3 branches around the country and 25 member organizations in the coalition. Today we have 15 branches, including 2 branches in Afrikaans-speaking communities. We have over 50 member organizations. We have the support of all the mainline churches. We have the support of key respected figures in the black and white communities. And we've been able to attract to our public activities up to 10,000 people nationally, not in any one center. In 1984, we ran a campaign called Troops Out, in which we demanded the immediate withdrawal of army troops from black areas. And in the course of that campaign, we had several conscientious objectors that fasted for a total period of 3 weeks. And then at the end of the campaign, we had members of the public invited to participate in a 24-hour solidarity fast. In 1985, we ran a campaign called Working for a Just Peace, in which over 600 E.C.C members and supporters went into black areas to work on community projects. We helped to rebuild daycare centers, we laid water pipes, we planted trees. And in the course of doing all of that, obviously we weren't attempting to seriously uplift the welfare of those communities. That wasn't possible in the period of a month, and not possible under apartheid. What we were doing was attempting to make a statement to both the white and the black communities. We were saying through our involvement in those community projects, if white people are to go into townships, then this is how we go in. Not carrying a gun, not wearing a uniform. We go in order to help rebuild communities and not destroy them. And above all, we go in having consulted the communities concerned and not against their wishes. In the course of the Working for a Just Peace campaign in particular, we were welcomed into black townships with open arms. And at times it was overwhelming, the response of black mothers especially that wanted to feed us while we were working in the townships, and from the black kids, young children, 8, 9 years old. And we were welcomed because we, not only at a symbolic level, but also practically stand in contrast to those white men that are going into township with guns and in uniforms. And they're the enemy. Since June last year, 1986, which was when the current state of emergency was imposed, the state has begun to pay us the kind of attention and directed us the kind of repression that historically has been reserved for black organizations and black activists. Since June, we've had over 60 of our members in detention, 70 by now. The homes of over 90 members have been raided by security police who come into our houses early in the morning, sometimes armed with submachine guns, and they trash the homes. We receive death threats and bomb threats at our meetings. Our motor cars are tampered with. 2 of our houses have been petrol bombing being like a Molotov cocktail, and 2 of our motor cars have been destroyed in that way. Many of our activists have been assaulted by right-wing elements outside meetings or pamphleteering in the streets, shopping centers. We are subjected to ongoing propaganda from both right-wing student organizations as well as government and army spokespeople. They accuse us of being as bad as the people that plant the bombs. In 1985, for example, the Minister of Police, in South Africa, he's called the Minister of Law and Order, referred to the E.C.C as one of South Africa's 4 main enemies, the others being the ANC, the Communist Party of South Africa, and the UDF, the United Democratic Front. Most seriously for us, under the current state of emergency, the government has passed a special law which now makes it an offense to oppose military service. The offense is punishable by 10 years imprisonment or a fine of 20,000 rand, which is about roughly £8,000. And it's through that restriction that the government hopes to ban us in effect, without formally banning us. But our position under the emergency has been that we're not prepared to give up or ban ourselves. We're determined to continue functioning and campaigning publicly for as long as it's physically possible for us to do so. And we have that determination to continue functioning partly because we're living in a society that is so fundamentally evil that we simply have no choice, but partly also because the repression that we experience as white activists, even under the emergency, is nothing like the repression that black organizations and activists experience. Non-racialism is a principle of our struggle, of our broad struggle. And by non-racialism we mean, firstly, that South Africa belongs to all the people who live in it, black and white, and then in a new South Africa, under a democratically elected government, black and white people will be able to live as equals and at peace with one another. Non-racialism is more than simply the end goal, however. Non-racialism is also the means by which we engage in struggle. So right throughout our history, the African National Congress and the United Democratic Front, as well as progressive black trade unions, have always placed great emphasis on white people becoming involved in struggle, being encouraged and invited to be part of that struggle. At all our public meetings, we would make sure that there were UDF speakers as the main speakers. We would also speak at UDF meetings. This is no longer possible under the current state of emergency, but prior to the imposition of the emergency, we would speak at the mass funerals and also at UDF meetings. We regularly consult UDF executive members, and we would see ourselves as a primarily white organization as answerable to black organizations. We understand that it's the African masses that are leading the struggle and not ourselves as white people. So we look for guidance to the African leadership in our country. Our organization has no informal or formal links with the ANC, but at the same time, we do call for the immediate unbanning of the African National Congress. And we do that because it's clear that it has, as an organization, the overwhelming support of the majority of South Africans. It's absolutely clear that if we were to have democratically elected government, it's absolutely clear that the ANC would be our next government. So when the E.C.C. makes its demands for a just peace in our land, one of the key demands as part of that would be the release of Mandela from jail and other political prisoners and detainees, as well as the unbanning of banned organizations like the ANC. In South Africa, in terms of South African law, it's considered treasonous to call for or to support sanctions and divestment. But what I can say is that from surveys that have been taken, it's clear that the majority of black South Africans do support sanctions and do support divestment. And it's also absolutely clear that every single progressive black organization inside our country or outside our country has called for sanctions and divestment to be intensified. The arguments against sanctions are that, in the main, that they would cause black South Africans, more than white South Africans, to suffer, that sanctions would lead to massive unemployment. The response to that from black people in our country and from black trade unions is that since when has international investment ever helped them? We've had international investment in our country since the discovery of gold and diamonds. And where has that led us? Only to greater unemployment, only to greater repression and poverty under apartheid. South African people are saying there is no way that we can end apartheid without suffering. If we organize strikes, if we organize protests at funerals, consumer boycotts, rent boycotts, any other form of non-violent resistance to apartheid, we get shot or we lose our jobs or we go hungry. So the nature of our struggle is such that in whatever form it takes, black people will suffer. But they're saying that they're prepared to endure that suffering if the ending of apartheid is brought closer. And so for that reason, they will support sanctions and divestment. I grew up in a white liberal home. What that means in the South African context is that We are opposed to apartheid, we say. We vote against the government, but we have no real understanding of the reality of our country, and we are racist. We're, as white youth, even liberal white youth, brought up to believe that the situation that we're in is perhaps a little extreme, but basically the way things ought to be. It's a situation that is natural. And for me, it was only going to university and being exposed to both academic courses as well as the activities of progressive student organizations, black and white, that for the first time at 18 or 19 years old, I came to understand what kind of country I was living in. And perhaps that's difficult for people in other parts of the world to understand, but that really is the case. We're brought up ignorant. And so 1980-81, when I went to university, I came to understand what kind of country I was living in, and for me it was then a relatively easy step to becoming involved politically. Also in 1981, I went overseas on holiday and went to Dachau, to a concentration camp in Germany, and felt completely detached from what had happened in Germany, 45 years ago, because all I kept thinking was the same thing is happening in my country now. And within Jewish communities, families, we always say that the memory of the Holocaust and the concentration camps need to be kept alive so that it never happens again. And there I was standing in Dachau, and I kept thinking, what's the it? The it can't possibly be the attempted extermination of Jewish people alone. The it is that level of barbarism, that level of racism. And it's happening in South Africa. And in the same way that Jewish families always say, why didn't the German people do anything? How can they claim that they didn't know what was happening? Well, the same is being said of white South Africans. So it was, ironically, in a concentration camp in Germany that I made what is now a lifelong commitment to be involved in the struggle against apartheid. And with that kind of background, conscription's the obvious issue to take up, or was for me, because as a white South African, even if I'm opposed to apartheid, I practice apartheid just by virtue of being white. I enjoy the privilege of being a white South African. That's bad enough. But when I go into the army, I end up having to support apartheid in a way that is qualitatively different from any other way, because I'm carrying a gun and I might have to kill people. So for white youth that are opposed to apartheid, our involvement in the army or expected involvement in the army presents a real crisis of conscience, a real dilemma, and has forced us to take up that issue politically. I've been living underground since June last year to avoid detention. Even living underground, I enjoy more privilege and more freedom than a black person who's not living underground. What I have to fear if I'm caught by the police is detention, whereas a black activist who is living underground and who is caught has to fear being shot and killed on the spot. And that happens in the Eastern Cape, in the Northern Transvaal, and in other parts of the country. In detention, really all I have to fear is the isolation from my community, whereas a black activist, and it could be a child in detention, has to fear systematic assault, and in many parts of the country, torture. Yet black activists remain enormously strong and courageous, and we draw inspiration from them. I don't want, as an outsider, I don't want to make general comments about what youth in this country should do or shouldn't do. So I'll talk mainly about their involvement around apartheid. It's absolutely essential. They have a moral responsibility to be involved in anti-apartheid work. They have that responsibility for a number of reasons. I mean, the fact that they are human beings and have consciences means that they should care about injustice and oppression in their own country as well as in other parts of the world. But more importantly, the British government, especially under Thatcher, is aiding and abetting apartheid. It's providing the economic assistance and in some cases the military assistance that apartheid needs to survive. So that imposes on freedom and peace-loving youth here a responsibility to work against apartheid. And they can do that in any way that they feel comfortable. I would say above all that they need, if they want to be involved in anti-apartheid work, they have to be organizationally involved, because there's such a great limit to what any of us can do as individuals. and it's only through our involvement in organizations that we're able to make effective contributions. At the same time, I would say that it's not good enough for British youth simply to focus on apartheid in South Africa while ignoring domestic racism in this country. And you would know that domestic racism here is pervasive, and it's often a trap, I think, that people in other countries fall into. It's easy for them to take on apartheid in South Africa because it's far away, it's one step removed, and they're not expected to confront their own heads and their own relations with other people. Whereas to focus on domestic racism in this country is more difficult, but it's absolutely essential. And I'm reminded of a quote from a black South African that recently toured the United States that said to the people there that he spoke to, and I think those words are equally appropriate here. He said to people, "You are worthy of my praise for the work that you do against apartheid, but we cannot take you seriously until racism in this country is taken seriously."